Yeah, we're live. I'm early because I have to leave early. But tonight we want to talk about home porting. So it's pretty common. It doesn't really matter what, in this particular instance, we're going to talk about some work that I did to some 706 heads. And we're going to talk about home porting, but it really wasn't any home porting because it was more like home unshrouding the valves. And so not getting in there and doing any bull work or anything like that. But I have done a little bit of that, not very much. And enough to say that I'm the average guy. I'm the average Joe. So the things that I could do are things that could easily be repeated by anybody else. So we're talking a little bit about unshrouding the valves on a set of 706 heads. And I did it on a set of 706 heads, obviously, that, like most people, I don't care about. there wasn't anything special about them. They were another set from the wrecking yard. And so, they're fairly easy to replace if you make a major mistake and, grind too far, take too much off. That would be usually the problem. Not taking enough off is not the problem. And that's why you go really slow and start small and take off a little bit. Don't get real aggressive on your bit that you're using. Aluminum, it's a lot easier to take off a whole bunch and a whole bunch in the wrong direction. Sometimes you come out of, like, when you're doing the bowl area, you'll be in the bowl area and it'll come up onto the deck surface and make a little spinny trough going across there. That's not good. It's not the end of the world. I mean, you could surface the head and fix that, but you don't want to do that because you especially don't want to connect one chamber to another chamber. That's definitely going to cause problems with sealing. So you don't want to do that. So you want to be very careful and do it when you're confident. So, I like, in this instance, I did some of the work using a carbide cutter so that we could, make short work of doing it. I've done a little bit of porting, so I felt fairly comfortable doing it. So you could go in, and what we're trying to do basically is, as the valve comes off of the seat, where does the edge of the valve go relative to the chamber wall? So does it get closer? Does it get farther away? Is it consistent? Is it exactly parallel with the wall? What's happening with it? And because of the shape of the wall and the shape of the valve, a lot of times it will get closer at various lifts. And then what you want to do is unshroud that and make that area bigger. So you want to lay back that wall, basically. Here's the problem. Making that wall big and away from the valve, that's all well and good. But there's a maximum diameter that you can make that, because there's a maximum diameter of the bore size. If you're taking a 706 head and putting it on, a 4065 bore, or an LS7, a 4125 bore, then you could go nuts and it could be really big. Most guys would be running this thing on a 4.8 or a 5.3. So a 3.780 bore, or maybe you've bored it 10 or 20 or 30 over. You could have gone even more. You could have gone out to a 5.7 bore, and that would make life a little easier. But what you have to do is the key to the success of this is, I wish that there was just one thing. There's not always just one thing. But one of the keys is to decide on, okay, what is my bore size? How big am I going? Now, how does that compare to the bore size, the inside diameter, basically, of the combustion chamber? Is the combustion chamber already bigger? Like, if we put a set of 243 heads on, which they've done from the factory, 243 heads on a 5.3. The L33 is a perfect example of that. 799, 243. They use those heads on there. Well, the combustion chamber already overhangs the bore size. It's too big. Not just in volume, so that you change the compression. I mean, when they run those motors like the L33 and they run them with the bigger heads, they run them with the 243 heads, which do indeed flow more. But where they flow more is mostly at the top. But it's a bigger chamber. So because it has more volume, the way that they've retained the static compression is they put a flat top piston with it. Now, you could run a flat top piston with a smaller chamber 706 head, but part of the reason, I think, is when I've tested these, like the 799 243 versus the 706 862 head, and the 862 head seems to do as well or better than the other head, run on the same motor on the same 5.3. I think that that's because this chamber size is too big and not just in volume, but it actually overhangs the bore on the smaller 5.3. And the chamber on the 5.3 doesn't overhang it. They're actually matched fairly well. And also, so we have a bigger valve also, and we have a bigger chamber. And so I don't think, my guess is we're probably not getting some of the flow dynamically that we would get from a better, what should be a better head. And when I've tested them back to back, we could speculate all that we want about what the airflow bench is telling us and stuff. But when the best way to do it is like I did, we do a back-to-back test on the 5.3 and we run it and go, well, this one makes this power and this one makes this power. And so I think that that's why they do well. But the thing is, even with that small bore size, we can open that chamber up. Now, this is especially the case if a lot of guys, and this is a good go-to, if you're taking a 706 head or an 862 head, and you're putting it on a 6.0. So if you're replacing the 317 head, you take that big chamber, lazy cylinder head, and you want, the guys do this because they want more torque. Okay, I want more low-speed torque. Good. A 706 head is going to be a huge change in power everywhere through the curve compared to a 317 head. It doesn't flow quite as much, again, like the 799 head, but the chamber is not only smaller, it's better. The chamber design of the 317 head, not great. So if you're upgrading to a 6-liter and you put a 706 head on there, that's going to be a good upgrade. You're going to get more compression. You're going to get a smaller valve. You're just going to get more low-speed torque. It's just going to be better. And so it makes quite a bit more power. It makes quite a bit more power just everywhere, not just at the top, but at the bottom too, which is where most guys are interested in. If you were doing that on a 706 head and you were putting it on a 6-liter, which is a 4-inch bore, then what you would do is take a 4-inch gasket and put it up to the chamber of the 706 head, and you'll see, and then you scribe it and go, okay, you put a mark around there and go, oh, look, I have a lot of room now between the edge of the combustion chamber and where that gasket overhangs, or where the out to the gasket. So you have a lot of room to lay that back. Basically on a 3780 bore, on a 5.3 bore or a 4.8 bore, you have less, but that doesn't mean that you can't still improve the flow. I'm going to show you how you do that. This is very simplistic. So if we have if we don't want to make, if we don't want to, if we put, let's say we put a 3780 gasket on here, most people are going to be using a bigger gasket than that anyways. And actually you can use a little bit bigger gasket on this. You can scribe this out to pass that and you'll still get gains. But let's say that we wanted to use a 3780 bore gasket on this thing. And then we scribe that. And so we've got room between the edge of the combustion chamber and where that gasket line is. You can lay back that wall to that point. Actually, you can lay back that wall farther than that. You just can't do it at the mating surface of the head. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's see if we can show that. Okay, so this is our valve. This is our combustion chamber wall. So when we're laying back that combustion chamber, if we say that this right here, that's the deck surface of the head. So the valve is going to go up to there. We don't want to make this any bigger. We don't want to make the combustion chamber basically, we don't want to make the internal diameter of the combustion chamber any bigger. So we want to maintain that. But everywhere below that, we can still port that out. I mean, this is obviously exaggerated, but if we make this arc a little bit, then as this valve is going up, it's going up through and improving the flow of this arc. So what happens is, oh, look, we got more flow because we have more distance away from that valve. And so that's exactly what I did. And that, according to Brian, he said, yeah, just come in and lay back that inside edge so that when the valve comes up, you have more flow around the valve and you're not holding that back. And it worked very well. When in doing this on my first try, I went used the aggressive cutter, went in and kind of laid that back. You don't have to go crazy. And what you do is when you bring the valve up and look at where it's traveling, you're going to go ahead and mark the edge of that combustion chamber. So I'll show you. I'll bring up this photo and you guys can take a look at what I'm talking about. Okay, so see, I have marked the combustion chamber, the edge of it, and now I haven't completed it yet, but we're going to be rolling this thing back. But this wall in here, you can make that divot bigger and still maintain this sealing area. But when that valve opens up, you're going to mark an area like I have here. Okay, it's about out to here is where we need to go, and then about out to here is where we need to go, because those are the problem areas. That's where the valve is closest to the combustion chamber wall. And so you're going to mark that, and that's the area that you concentrate on. You don't have to go in and you don't have to cut the chamber all the way around. You don't even have to cut it very much of it to make a fairly significant difference. And so what I did was do a little bit, and we would try it and go, okay, this looks like it's going to improve things. And then after flow testing it, after finishing that up, I cut it with the more aggressive cutter, and then I put a cartridge roll on there and smoothed it out primarily so that it would look better. Because like I said, you don't want a bunch of troughs in there. But after doing that, we picked up, just from doing that, we picked up like 10 or 15 CFM, and I did it both on the intake and the exhaust. And I didn't spend a lot of time doing it. I mean, I didn't go in and make this thing, perfect. Eric Weingeiger has nothing to fear from my porting. It's not good at all, but it was effective. And I was surprised that, because I just took the head off the flow bench, went over to where we were porting it, and to put it back on the flow bench. And then this is the same day, within 30 or 40 minutes or whatever that I spent doing the porting. And then we were able to test it. I did the intake first and then the exhaust. Now you are going to increase the chamber volume a little bit by doing this, but it was not very much. It was like 1 cc or 1.5 cc. So you could mill that back if you wanted to get the compression back and make that work. But it is good. And I never even went in and did any bowl work or anything. So I think that there would be even more airflow to be had. I mean, obviously we're not going to take it from its 240-ish CFM to 300 CFM by doing things like this. You have to really know what you're doing. And when they do those things, by the way, they put bigger valves and all that stuff in them, different seats and stuff. And so they do a lot of work. But this is a good, easy trick that anybody can do at home. If you've got the heads off, you got junkyard heads, especially if you got junkyard heads that you don't care about. You're like, I mean, I can't make them worse than they are. And so this was a good example for me and a good learning experience, because I'd never done it before. So this was on my first try. And like I said, we picked up a pretty good amount, and I didn't lose flow anywhere that I can remember. I'm pretty sure. I think I posted, I have a video up on it. I didn't lose flow, I don't think, anywhere in the curve. So it was nothing but beneficial, which is the ideal situation. If you're going to make something better when you're porting, you want to make it better everywhere. You don't want to trade low lift or certainly mid lift flow for top end flow. That's not a good trade-off. So if you can get gains everywhere, then it seems to work fairly well. And then obviously you can also put bigger valves and do all this stuff. There's definitely some gains to be had from doing that. So the next thing I want to do sometime in the near future is I'll do a combustion chamber again, see if I can duplicate that, and then I'll go in and maybe do some Super Richie bowl work and just see if, let's get it, if we can get another 10 or 20 CFM. I know I was able to do that when I did if you look at the 3800 videos, the 3800 porting videos, I was able to get some fairly decent flow gains by doing some just what I would call very rudimentary work. I didn't really change the short turn, because that's the area that I'm afraid of. I feel like that I could really ruin the head not knowing what change needs to be done to that short turn. Like, I don't have a template or anything to make that the way that it should be. But doing, a fairly reasonable amount of bowl work and just making the port kind of clean. I didn't port match it. I didn't do any of that. So, and I got fairly decent gains compared to what other people have done that put a lot more porting effort into it than I did. So the nice thing is that when you do things like this and you're porting, whether you're doing combustion chamber work or bowl work, the first gains that you get are the easiest. You If you look like a hero, oh, look, yeah, here's another 10, here's another 15, here's another 8 or 12 CFM. The later ones get harder and harder to get, but the early ones, it works out fairly well. So I recommend doing that. If you're going to run boost on it, it's probably not necessary. But if you're putting together a combination, especially if you're putting a 6-liter combination together and you're putting 706 heads on it, I would recommend doing this only because we know that on a cam to 6-liter with a 706 head or an 862 head, it wants more airflow. And if you could give it more airflow, then it's definitely going to be beneficial. So we'll see what you guys got going on. And our poll for tonight. Have you ever tried do-it-yourself home porting? Go ahead and put our poll up there. Unshroud the world. Take it all out. I recently cleaned up a set of E7 heads. Rebuilding heads takes a lot of time. It is a lot. And doing an iron set of heads, not my idea of fun. These were definitely aluminum heads. A 706 LS head is definitely the way to go. I just smoothed out my ports and smoothed my edges and got the swirl ramp blended in. Nice. Anybody else polishing wheels? That's a bit of work. I know that back in the day, I had slotted mags on my Camaro, my first car. And so we used to jack the car up and just put it in drive and use steel wool you would spin the tire, reasonably slow, and then use steel wool on it, and it would shine the mag wheels up. Admiral, the 3076s would be good for 800 horsepower. No brakes. You even with a stock intake manifold, you can pick up power by porting the heads, but the intake manifold will hold you back. If only because it's going to hold you back from making power at a higher engine speed. Porting only helps if you have high compression or boost. If it's factory, you won't have a noticeable difference. That's not accurate. No. Any modified engine will see gains from porting. It will, even a stock one, just not as much. I mean, we've run ported heads on an otherwise stock LS3, and it was about 10 or 11 horsepower. That's the most extreme example that I can see of a factory situation, only because it's already got it's only making less than 500 horsepower. And it's got enough head flow to already support 600 horsepower. And so if you put heads over 600 horsepower, so if you put heads on it that will support 700 horsepower, it doesn't really matter because it's, it already has more than enough. But on a lesser application, if you can port the heads and get some kind of modifications, but the gains that you get will increase with the other things that you have. So if you do a back-to-back head test of a stock head versus a ported head, and you do that on a combination that has a camshaft and has an intake manifold, the gains are going to be much greater. But compression would be a very, very minor thing. And boost, actually, I wouldn't recommend porting the head on a boosted application, certainly not for 1,000 horsepower or less, because you can make that with a stock head. Took the 799s off of a Gen 453 when doing a DOD delete. Put a set of razor blade rebuild 862s and a stock LQ9 cam. Be good. Uh-oh, Jason. You opened up a hole from the exhaust port into the water jacket. Yeah, you got a little aggressive there, huh? I totally feel like my engine build has inspired some questions. What is your engine build? You have to remind me, right, so that I know what you're talking about. Turbo Sentra, no engine in the Sentra today. That's okay. There's time. 862 heads, home ported for more efficiency, but not every bit you can get on a 408. Okay. That should be at least a good torquey combination. I don't think that I would pick an 862 head unless it's what I had for a 408. I think I would pick something else that would easily make a lot more power. Because as we saw when we went from the 706 or 862 to a 799 head, even on a cam 6-liter, the 6-liter made more peak power. It lost down low, but it still picked up more peak power. On a 408, I think the 706 head would definitely be restrictive. Why not lay back the cylinder wall and mount the gasket like a big block? We can. I plan to do that on the. You really don't need to do that to the head gasket. You can just put a bigger bore head gasket on it, which is what usually is done. Quite honestly, I don't remember seeing a 378 head gasket. They were all bigger than that. So the gasket's not in the way of what you're doing. But notching the top of the bore is a good idea for a big valve. I would like to see what that does, but because I haven't tested that on an LS. Yeah, we're just deshrouding the valve or unshrouding, either way. Got a torn apart 90s LT4 laying around if you want it. An LT4, that's a good motor. Dave, you don't know who Eric Weingarter is? I think that's his name, right? Eric does porting. He has a YouTube channel up on porting. Richard, will you join us for a trip to Mexico when you get the GLH running good? I don't know where you guys are. I'm gonna be going out to get the GLH before too long here. I have an update. It has primer on it now. Ben and Brian just sent me and they even did some welding on the front end because this thing had a big air to air on it, a front mount on it, and they cut up the radiator support for it, and so they fixed that. But yeah, the Omni has you guys, you can see. Got some primerage. The Advisor Arts 5, Golden Porting Rules is a good video on the subject. Yeah, David is a good guy. He knows a lot about porting. Is it possible to add block filler in the exhaust runner heat crossover? I don't know how stable that is. I'm worried about what's going on, mostly like frequency vibration in the motor and that stuff coming loose. Let's see. I'm scrolling back. Has he won engine measures? David, nobody's saying that you're not a good porting guy. We just said somebody else was. Those things can both still be true. I did a light porting job on 360 Magnum's heads, matched with a 276 roller cam. Seems to help out a bit on the track. Shaved 0.7 of a second off my car. That's a lot. That's another example where you would need, the thing should benefit from porting that head because that head doesn't flow very well. Ruined a few F22B1 Honda heads before I got the hang of it. I've only done a little tiny bit of porting on B series Honda stuff, only because I was too afraid to ruin what they had going on. I'm porting a 140 Mercruiser Chevy 2 head now. Don't mind grinding iron heads. Are there any things to avoid or strive for? For example, smooth surface, shiny. See, I don't believe that surface finish is a thing. On my workbench, currently 2 sets of 6.8 V10 2V heads. Nice. Took me 28 hours to clean up iron heads for a Magnum. That's a lot. Pulling our 2.3 SVO drag week engine out and freshening it. How do you actually run a Mustang in drag week with a 2.3 turbo? And if you do, how well did it do? Dave, it seems to me you're asking a question that you already know the answer to. Would it be better to increase mid-lift flow or the high-lift flow at the loss of mid-lift flow? The answer is the same answer as every question. It depends. What are the rest of the things you're doing with the motor? One thing about grinding iron heads is the cutter does not clog. That is true. I usually, stop and dip the tip in. I use transmission fluid or power steering fluid, but guys use all kinds of things to stop that from happening. The Pulsar 3076 exhaust housing fit those cartridges? I have no idea. And I never check interchangeability on those. The rougher surface keeps the fuel in suspension. So my question for rough surface keeping fuel in suspension is there's a boundary layer on every surface when air is flowing past it. There's a boundary layer, so I want to know how that keeps the fuel in suspension with the boundary layer present. I don't believe that the surface does that. Dave, good port design keeps fuel in suspension. I think the fuel in suspension happens before the port finish comes into play. Our 862 and 706 heads the same. Yeah, just the casting technique I think is different. Tico, an Elgin 1841 sloppy stage 3 will run just fine in a Gen 353 as far as piston to valve clearance, 595 lift intake. The lift has nothing to do with piston to valve clearance, or almost nothing to do with it. It's all duration. But you've run a sloppy stage 3 in there? Have you done any testing on the TPIS LS6 intake mod where they mod it to a 4-bolt 90mm throttle body opening? Nearing the experts claim horsepower numbers that match the fast intake. TPIS has an LS6 mod that they do. I've seen the rod mod stuff on the LS3 intake manifolds. But I would like to see an LS. I mean, the TPIS guys have been doing it a long time. I know Jim over there and have done stuff with them on other TunePort stuff. But I didn't know that they were doing LS stuff. But I've not seen an LS6 intake manifold make fast LSXR intake manifold power. Let's see. Okay, Richard, would it be a good idea to split both sides of the exhaust into a twin system for divided exhaust housing so they essentially share pressure between the sides? I don't know what this is a V8, right? And so you have one side, one head going to one turbo and one going to the other turbo. Now, what do you want to split? Do you want to make it two going into one and two going into the other? I don't think you're going to make it any better by doing that. Brother, do you mind braze exhaust crossover on a set of forward iron FE heads? I think that welding something would, brazing, I would feel more comfortable with rather than putting epoxy or something in there. Richard, didn't you say 231 duration is for the 6-liter LS to make more horsepower, say 500? More than what? So I don't understand the rest of the question. You can make 500 horsepower with a 5.3 with the 231 cam or something there or above if you have the other stuff. But we did run that camshaft on a 6-liter, but with which cylinder head and which intake manifold to make 500? Tico. Oh, I've never run that camshaft in anything, but if you have and you've run it, then it will fit. I've never measured it, so I don't know. What's the best results you've achieved from home porting? I haven't done any home porting other than the one that we're talking about here on an LS. Question, you probably did a video on it, but I haven't found it. I have a set of 706 heads. Will cleaning up the casting runners make noticeable difference when on a 4.8? Are you talking about your porting into the ports and cleaning that up? That's not where you want to pay attention to. You want to pay attention to the area that we're talking about in the combustion chamber and in the bowl area. The runner it would be the last thing that you would look at. Surprised I'd have a percentage in the chat. Oh, I didn't even look at our chat. So we're at 63% have done home porting. I like that. Richard, why do you not believe in surface finish? Because my comment was I don't believe surface finish keeps fuel in suspension because of the boundary layer. I don't think that's what you're relying on. I think that the fuel being in suspension, first of all, it's being injected into the head port with high pressure through a fuel injector, which is doing the atomization. It's also getting atomization through the carburetor on a carbureted application. I don't think that the surface finish changes that. And if it does, it would be by very, very little, in my opinion. I've also seen lots of flow testing where you have because this was a big thing when CNC stuff came out, especially early on, when the CNC cutters, because of the aggressiveness of the tool that they were using, you would have, basically little CNC troughs. Now, how long you do the porting and what size you're using and all that would determine how smooth that surface is. But I've seen people do that and then go in and hand finish them to knock all the peaks off of those troughs, basically, and it did almost nothing to airflow. And I don't think it would do anything to power either. You know, I'm not saying that hand porting doesn't also work, but I'm just saying that that surface finish didn't seem to have much or any of an effect on airflow when they did the testing on it. 1098, 127 on the Mustang at Drag Week. So what did I miss? Like, what year car is that and all that? And is it a 2.3 turbo motor? Because that's kind of cool. Somebody mentioned something about the blue collar, the dish piston. A factory dish piston doesn't change piston to valve clearance because the piston hits on the upper edge where there's not a dish. And so it doesn't change it, the piston to valve clearance. The dish piston doesn't help that at all. Thought the dimple porting was the future. Stevie, I have a turbo question. I saw a 70 GTO with a Ram Air 5. It does exist. So somebody built a Ram Air 5 and put it in a 1970 GTO because it didn't come from the factory that way. But it had a draw-through twin turbo setup. Yeah, you can make a draw-through, especially if it's got old Ray J turbos on it that have a carbon seal that would work as a draw-through setup. Banks used to run a lot of that stuff on marine applications and on street, on automotive, car applications too. So you can do that, and it doesn't work as well as doing it on a modern blow-through application. Park match 69 350 on Windsor heads for Mercury Montego and put them in a Cougar. Cool. I've been putting Dave Vizard's teaching into practice. Yeah, if you can practice what he preaches, you'll probably do fairly well. I've mild ported my weed eater. Nice. And piped it. That's good. I remember piping the gope head. Not much info on the 863 heads. What is an 863 head? I'm scrolling. Something I heard David mention about surface finish, and it was useless to polish the lower part of the chamber. Darren Morgan really knows about heads. Yeah, he says. Point is, Richard, you cannot get lost in the high lift flow numbers. I agree. Mid-lift stuff is way more important. Is the Phytech LS intake any good? I don't know which one you're talking about. I think that they have several. The only ones that I've ever tested are the like fabricated aluminum, sniper looking manifolds, and those have been tested many times, so we know what they do. Steve Dulcich talked about running some flat six heads he was trying to port. Yeah, he went through several of them. Got water through a bunch of them. Do manifolds count? Yes. If you ported the manifold, anything. If you've ported a two-stroke, whatever you did. I drilled the manifold of my moped from 9 millimeters to 12 this week and gained 3 miles an hour top speed. Nice. Is port matching worth the effort? That's going to be I'm sure that there's an interesting conversation going on about that. I have not seen port matching make power yet. I want to see it. I want it to work, but I have not seen that yet. Eric did a rec port intake to a peanut port head test recently. Is not good. Why was it not good? I've done that. We've run that many times. In fact, they didn't do it on a peanut port, I don't think. I know that they did rec port intake manifolds on oval port heads from the factory, from Mercury Marine. A lot of their boat engines came like that, and lots of blower engines have been run like that. Blue collar's out. Don't spend time around people who don't want to see you do well. That's true. There's pretty easy in internet world, especially in YouTube, but in any of Facebook or whatever, all of them, the people that are the most vocal are the negative people that have issues. So just did some quick math. Field droplet suspension isn't much of an issue when even as low as 3,000 RPM, the entire intake vent is 1/48th of an inch of a second. Yeah. But if you port bad heads, I'll bet it would be more better in horsepower. Yeah, the worse the head is, like the worse the stock head is, like the 5-liter Ford or the 351, same head. They need a lot of improvement. That's why you get big. That's why you get big gains from cylinder head upgrades. I'm sure we've done 100 horsepower from a head upgrade on a Ford, going from a stock one to probably more than that. On the 392, I think it was more than that. Swirl polish the intake valves. Have you ever made a video showing cams good for towing on an LQ9, LQ4? Yes, there's lots of 6-liter stuff up there. Eric Weingarten showed that not port matching showed a 12 horsepower loss on a big block Chevy. Was that on the rec port to a peanut port thing? And then he port matched that? Because that I could believe. Do you think it's important to polish the exhaust port to help keep carbon building up? I don't think that that's the reason that I would port it. I think I would port it to get more flow and to make more power. But I think you're going to have soot build up even on a polished one. Don't go to 202 intake valves on a small block Chevy unless you plan running over 7,000 RPM. Why is that? I mean, almost every performance head for a small block Chevy has a 202 intake valve. In my opinion, most modern head engines are pretty good design, and there isn't much room for improvement versus older engines. They'll start with a better modern design head. Only polish the exhaust side. Isn't there more registered GTOs than they ever built? I thought I remember reading that about like 57 Chevys and stuff too, and maybe even Corvettes. Working the bowl and short turn radius on the exhaust port of a 460 head is popular. Richard, did you make power with the home port heads? I never even tested it. I never even tested on the dyno. I need to, which is why I want to do another set. 1993 Mustang, 2.5 stroker, cool. TKO 600 trans. I had about 550 and picks of tires on the launch. Fun car, lots of Esslinger parts. Cool. Esslinger has been making 2.5, 2.2, 2.0 horsepower for a long, long time. Stock LM7, LS6 intake, 5-speed Fox body, looking to upgrade cam, but most of the information I see is with truck intake manifolds. It's the same. How will the LS6 affect horsepower torque out of the cam? It's not gonna change your need for a camshaft. The camshaft that you would pick would be the same. Take a look at the intake manifold test I did, and you can see how the truck manifold compares to the LS6 manifold. The LS6 is a little bit better on the top compared to the truck manifold. So the cam that you pick is still going to be the cam that you want to run in the RPM range that you want, with the converter that you want, and making the kind of power that you want. None of that will change. Just the LS6. You just happen to have an LS6 intake manifold on it. Nobody talks much about airspeed. Always flow. Airspeed's a harder thing to measure. What do you think about adding swirl polished valves, supported heads? I would like to see, Eric's probably done the test of that, I would imagine. I'd like to see if there's actually a change. Somebody sent me a thing about some kind of valve that I don't think I'd seen before. It has a whole bunch of these like little steps on it. And I'd like to, I don't know how that can work, but I'd like to see it. Wilson manifolds tell me they smooth and port match dual and single plane manifolds and gain 25 horsepower. It's $900 for that 25 horsepower. Again, Keith is a really great guy, and they do lots of good stuff there. I just haven't seen where you do nothing else and you just match the port up, the end of the port, like within a half inch or 1 inch or whatever of the manifold and the head. And I don't care which one you need to change. Usually you don't need to change both of them, but even if you had to change both of them a little bit, I'd like to see, like, getting 25 horsepower just from an intake manifold. That's pretty good. Getting 25 horsepower from port matching, I'd like to see that. Just got back from Bali. Oh, nice. Honda 90s. Yeah, out everywhere, right? On a GT40 head, would it be better to concentrate on cleaning up the exhaust port? You need to do both. The head doesn't flow very much on the intake side. I have that video is up on what they flow. So you need more flow, intake flow, to get more power. Jamie, your 706 heads can flow way more than a stock 317 head would ever think of. We had 706 heads that flowed way over 300 CFM. I didn't port them. Brian TOOLEY did when he owned Total Engine Airflow, but there are other guys that have programs for those. So you can make a 706 head as good as almost any even aftermarket head out there. So if you want to do that, you can do that. And then anywhere between stock and the absolute deal, you can get any range in there. Edelbrock actually has some good heads. JB, they come with, were you saying they come with 194 intakes? No, most performance heads come with a 202 intake valve on a small block Chevy. There are some that come with a 194 valve and some factory ones that came with a 194, but even a set of Fuelie heads, the good Fuelie heads that they put in a DZ302 or an L76 or an LT1, those all had 202 intake valves from the factory. Soften the chambers. That's a good idea. Ask John Kazi about CHI intake manifolds that he destroyed 2 times and ended up running an out-of-the-box intake manifold. So it was already good. The ones that I tried were really good. Port wise, anybody starboard heads? Because they only want to turn right. I hope I got my seamanship right there. Molly MLS gasket has a 38335 bore size. 2 more minutes. Let's see. 194 intake valve compared to 202 intake valve makes more velocity and better atomization at lower RPM. I'd like to see that test. Let's see. Gene Berg used to do something called semi-hemi chamber and is ported. It opened the chamber some weird way, and he had to run 40 degrees. Yeah, he had to have reshaped it and made it bigger if it wanted that much advance, I would think. Although I'm not an expert on VW, so I don't know what kind of timing they would want to run anyway. Back to the question, what's the difference? The difference in what? So we're going to go ahead and close out our poll. What's the advantage of using MLS head gaskets? They're not going to break from pressure. If you damage an MLS head gasket, you've damaged something else in the motor. Chris from Australia. Trying to find one more question. I got to get going. Is a 181 exhaust valve small for a 600 horsepower 440? Does it make 600 horsepower? If it makes 600 horsepower, then no. It wouldn't be unusual for a big block Chevy with a 188 exhaust valve. A 600 horsepower would be pretty easy with that kind of valve. So I think you should be able to do that. What is the exhaust flow? And really the intake flow is going to be more important. Right now, I've got to get going. So I'll see you guys all tomorrow. I'm working on a video. One of the questions I get a lot is, I've done lots of camshaft tests. So if we have a stock cam, we put a camshaft in. But Richard, what happens? Can I just put rockers in? And will the rockers give me some of what the cam does, or none of it, or most of it? What will it do? And so I got that video coming up for you guys tomorrow. Hola. Adios, I guess probably would be better. I'll see you guys all tomorrow.